Hey, if we can, no, we're gonna move
Okay, we're
that.
gonna go away.
You know what?
Whatever you want.
Might as well just stick it up there.
Let me take this, sir.
Okay, if we can get organized, that includes myself as well. All right, everybody? Right. Way back years ago when I went to camp, okay, I went to a Hebrew-speaking camp. People from New England would hear of it. Camp Yavna. That was what? Well, no, this was. But we used to have a lot of Israeli staff. So one of the things the Israeli staff first taught all of the American campers was when they shouted, "Sheket b'vakasha," and the answer was, "Hey," right? Right? Okay. I don't know either, but and some wise kid would always say, "That's only for horses," right? Okay, let's start with our bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, today we're going to pick up our subject regarding Rashi's Talmud commentary. We began that a little bit last time. And I did not make handouts for this topic. I'm going to give just a few examples, but remember we've said that the primary focus of spending the amount of time that we did on the Chumash commentary was because it was my feeling that in general we would tend to look at that and gain from that a sense of Rashi's let's call it his mechanics for the moment, okay? And therefore, hopefully, when people would look at Rashi on their own, they would be able to begin to pick up some of that as well, okay? When we concluded last time, one of the things we pointed out was that later generations saw that it was significant Rashi's role in creating this commentary on the Talmud, okay? And we cited an example from a book called Tzedel Derech, okay, by Menachem ben Zera, who quoted the fact that without Rashi, the Talmud would have been forgotten in Israel, okay? And we suggested that he may have based that on the idea that the Rashi's commentary basically opened up the Gemara, the Talmud, the Bavli Talmud, to those not only who were official, so to speak, studying in the yeshivas, not only his but others, but those who wanted to study on their own. Okay. Well, Rambam had something that was important, but remember the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, he doesn't cite his sources from the Gemara. So some felt that was a lacuna in the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, and that's why we have a whole perush based by somebody else to do so. Okay? But we will get somewhat later to that issue of what was Rashi's lasting influence, okay, a little bit down the road, okay? So I wanted us to understand, at least conceptually, okay, why was Rashi's commentary so important, okay? And I brought again along two books that I will cite some examples from. One is in Hebrew on Rashi by Avraham Grossman, okay? And the other is called Rashi, the Man in His World by Ezra Sharashevsky, okay? And both of them each have an entire chapter in their books on Rashi's Talmud commentary, okay? And they cite specific examples, which a few of them will touch on, but primarily I want us to get, as I say, a conceptual idea of some of the issues that Rashi had to deal with and his approach in the Talmud. I would begin by reminding us, why did we include an aspect of history with this study of Rashi? Okay, we talked about Rashi's personal life, okay, and the years he spent in mines and worms as a student, okay? And it could very well be that he began his own notes, let's say, from his study there. What was more important for us to remember was that Rashi's teachers were themselves students of an even more significant or greater authority, okay? And that was, we said, Rabbeinu Gershon. And one of the aspects of his work was to collect manuscripts of the Gemara and try to come to a understanding of what is the correct text of the Gemara. Okay? We all know, I'm sure, that originally it was an oral law and only later written down. Okay? But we can imagine that on these manuscripts, okay, there were probably additional scribal notes written on the side, so to speak. If you look at I think anyway, any Magid Shiur, even today for Daf Yomi, you would see the Gemara text that they have, and there are always some sort of notes on the side, okay?
Or stickies.
Stickies could be, okay? I remember having an opportunity when Rabbi Dahan used to come and give shiurim. He often gave the Shabbos, the shiur for Daf Yomi, okay? It was before I got involved, but I would come to that. And I once had the opportunity to see the inside of his Gemara. Now, he had a large, full set of Shas, full size, and the whole edge, okay, beyond Rashi and beyond Tosafot, if you know how a page of Gemara is structured, right? With the text in the middle and Rashi on one side, Tosafot on the other, and then around the two sides was what I would have called Rabbi Dahan's Perush, okay? So we understand then that in those days, when everything was a manuscript, it's very possible that you could have had handwritten text of the Gemara and then some scribes' notes that could have accidentally found their way into the text, okay? Right? But I don't want us to focus on that, but to realize that Rashi himself also had to carry on Rabbeinu Gershon's approach of determining what was a text. Okay? Now, if we understand that, we can better understand that just learning Gemara itself, before we go into some of the examples, can be challenging, right? The Gemara is what I would call for the moment somebody's footnotes, somebody's cram notes, somebody's class notes, okay? It's very short sentences. It's no punctuation, okay? We don't always know in terms of the discussion, who says what to whom, because the text doesn't tell us that, okay? We can have a phrase and we can't always be sure if the phrase is a question or is it a statement, right? So all of these, what I will call textual aspects of Gemara itself, is something that would need to be addressed, and that Rashi felt it was important to, and somehow enlighten, if I can use that word, the student to being able to address that question. Okay, so in these and other books, we can see, for example, the following elements that Rashi has to address, but there are some other examples. I want to take, okay, a different case for a moment and then come back, right? We all have read enough Torah that we know, for example, there are certain laws and practices that are described in the Torah. I could give an give an example of reading of the Torah. Were those practices followed in Rashi's time? Probably not. Okay. Now, let's flip it and say something else. In the Talmud, we do not always have a clear text that tells us what is the law. We have a discussion. Okay, so-and-so said this, so-and-so said that. We see back and forth, okay, but we don't always have at the end of the discussion a phrase that says, Hilchata ke so-and-so. The law is like so-and-so. How do we know? Okay, Rashi again had to deal with that question. By his time, certain things were, as we might say in Yiddish, geschrieben. Okay, it was already accepted, written down, already practiced halacha. Okay, but that wasn't the case in the time of the Gemara. So he has to deal with that. So there are any number of what we could call textual issues. There is issues of the legal flow of the Gemara. Okay, all of these items. Okay, so Dr. Chaim Pearl, who has a book on Rashi, suggests that there are really three kinds of major, what we'll call legal, practical issues that Rashi had to face in his writing his commentary. Okay, and I want to share those with you and see if you would agree or disagree with him. Okay, his first was that there were laws and teachings in the Torah and elsewhere, which in the course of history were declared by the leading and authoritative rabbis to be no longer relevant, and therefore, for all practical purposes, were taken out of normative Judaism. Right? That's why I gave the example, perhaps, of the sota, of the house that had leprosy, things like that. Right? So that so we might say, perhaps, yes, that was a challenge.
Does the law of the leprosy still apply?
Okay.
Talking about it, I don't know.
All right. That's why I specifically chose the example of the house. Okay. Okay. All right. Let's take Pearl's second criteria. There are many current Jewish religious laws and customs at the time of Rashi, which are not mentioned in the Torah whatsoever, and which would need to be addressed. Okay. I tried to think of a specific case. Okay, I couldn't immediately come to one. Well, this is what he was suggesting, Pearl. We might disagree in that case.
He doesn't bring any examples.
He didn't bring examples, right? Number 3, there are countless teachings in the Torah and the Tanakh which cannot be understood, never understood in accordance with a pshat, simple literary meaning. Such laws could not be incorporated into practical Judaism without a traditional explanation accompanying the written text. Yes. Yeah.
Might be modes of dress or other minhagim that certain areas had that, like minhagim almost.
Okay, good example. Good example, Sarah. Okay, Sarah's referring to the fact that, and I'm going to just expand your point for a moment. We do know that in the Gemara, at times it tells us, b'ma'arava, in the west, okay, in the east, west, in the west, okay, where they're referring to Eretz Yisrael, such and such is done. So when they tell us that, what does that imply? It implies in Babylonia, okay, maybe they didn't do it that way. Okay, all right. So therefore, there could be minhagim or customs that were not maintained. Okay, best example of that real quickly is that we know in the time of Chazal, the time of the Gemara, in Eretz Yisrael, they had a triennial cycle for reading the Torah, right? 3 years to finish the whole text. In Bavel, in Babylonia, they did it in 1 year, okay? Well, why do we do it now? Because we follow the Babylonian Talmud, okay? I'm sure that by Rashi's time, they probably did it also, okay? But, yes, sir.
The triangular cycle that was used
Triennial
in
cycle, yeah.
Israel, did they take a third of the Sedra, the next week, next third?
No, our first year was 1/3, second year was the middle third, third
Of the
year is
same-
the
of the
third.
same portion,
Same parsha.
which I think some of the conservatives should have followed.
They might, right? Okay, all right, yes,
I'm just wondering, I heard that when Hashem gave the Torah,
yeah,
he gave it, and there are 4 ways to explain it. So one is pshat.
yeah,
Like what we read, this is what it is. And.
Pshat, Remez, Drash, and
Right,
Sod,
this
right?
is Remez, this is what Rashi and these Mefarshim are considered as Remez?
No.
Or is.
Rashi is considered a Pashtan. Okay.
Pshat.
Pshat,
Rashi considered Pshat, so what is Remez?
Remez is allegory.
Yeah, I know the meaning of the word.
Okay,
but
it's a hint.
What does it apply to?
It hints at something, okay, but it's not the actual meaning of the text.
But there is a soul, the fourth one. is
That's
a soul.
mystical.
So that's Kabbalah. So,
Right.
So what's the difference between?
Drash, Pshat, Remez, Drash, and Sod.
So Rashi is Pshat,
Right. But I'm going to use your question
yes,
to come back to Pearl's third point,
right.
okay? Which is why then, okay, if there are things there that are difficult to understand, Rashi in his Gemara commentary must rely on an explanation by the rabbis, by Chazal, just as we saw him having done so in his Chumash commentary, because he wants to either indicate and explain something that may not be familiar with the people of his own time, okay, or convey a certain value, message, idea to them, to teach them something, okay, right? So that was what Chaim Pearl suggests were three major challenges to Rashi. Okay? But we're talking also about the text of the Gemara as well. Okay? We all know the Gemara, the Talmud is written in Aramaic, right? Babylonian Aramaic. Okay? How many people of Rashi's time do you think spoke Babylonian Aramaic?
Not many.
About as many as now in Century Village in 2020, right? You don't go up to somebody and greet them in Babylonian Aramaic, okay? So that's one. The language was problematic. Yeah, right. So the language was a problem for the Jews of France and Germany as well, okay? We said the Gemara lacks punctuation. Okay, you don't know if it's a question or if it's going to be a statement. Okay, so in that particular case, okay, Rashi may have included just a single word explanation. He'll cite, like we saw in the Chumash, a key word, a key phrase, right? And then give his explanation. He does the same thing in the Gemara. But a one-word explanation could be the phrase bitmiyah, okay, which just means question. Or he could answer, put a one-word phrase, nichuta, okay, which would mean a declarative statement. So Rashi then is telling us, here's this phrase. I'm telling you, is it understood as read it as a question, or read it as an answer, a statement, an explanation. Okay. What else do we see? Okay. We mentioned that Rashi had to deal with the manuscripts, with the texts. Rabbi Einu Gershon had made significant strides in trying to establish a fixed text, but it still could be problematic. Sharashevsky, in his book, okay, goes into a significant detail in terms of trying to point things out. And I want to just share a short quote from what he says. Rashi's genius as a commentator on the Talmud lies in his ability to intuit the full meaning of the words uttered by the sages and to convey it in his written commentary. His ingenuity enabled him to sense the milieu of the Talmud and become a participant in the Talmudic discussions. Thanks to his sensitivity, he succeeded in resolving textual problems by means of the guarding particles with which he supplemented seemingly incoherent Talmudic passages. So, putting Sharashevsky's comment here in a little broader explanation, Rashi brings you in to be part of the discussion. Okay, if I remember correctly, I was once told that when the Rav Soloveitchik gave one of his early shiurim, okay, he explained to the people in his shiur, he says that we are participating as part of a group. Okay, you have Ravina, you have Ravashi, you have Abaye, you have Rava, you have Rabbi Yehuda, you have Rabbi Meir, and we're all sitting in the same room discussing a particular topic or issue. And we're participating in that discussion. And so I think of that, what the Rav said, as a way of helping us better appreciate what Sharashevsky here is suggesting by saying that Rashi brings you in, okay? He will say to you, there may be a statement and his comment may simply be, Rabbi so-and-so said. Okay? That's all he says. Doesn't explain the statement, but it keeps you in track in terms of what is the dialogue. Okay? Who said what? To whom? Under what? Or he might just cite a source, okay, regarding a certain situation. Okay? So Sharashevsky feels that clearly Rashi inserts himself into the discussion in the Gemara, sometimes telling us, as we said, if it's a question, sometimes if he says it's a statement, okay? It also reminds us, as we said, who said what? So-and-so said, okay? His focus is to clarify the Talmudic text precisely because it might be like a stenographer writing down a court situation, shorthand, okay? The same way that can happen as well, okay? Now, why is that also important? A contribution on Rashi's part, okay? Sharashevsky wants to tell us the following. Later on in Jewish history, okay, particularly, let's say, 16th, 17th, 18th, even to the 19th, maybe the 20th century, okay, other styles of learning Talmud developed. Some of us, I'm sure, in the room have heard of the term pilpul, okay, pilpul, okay, which is sometimes translated as splitting casuistry, okay? If you go like this, it's going to be like this. And if you go like that, it's going to be like that. And if you say this, and if you say that, and you, right? That's pilpul in a very brief manner, okay? But it is a style of learning Gemara, okay? Now, if that's the case, did Rashi do that? Absolutely not. The same way I'm going to suggest, both Sharashevsky and others suggest, that Rashi was a Pashtan, tried to get to the basic, simple understanding of the text in the Torah. That was Rashi's approach in terms of the Gemara. Okay? Okay, anybody who goes back to old television shows, okay, will remember an actor called Jack Webb, I think, and the show called
Give me the fact.
Just Give Me the Facts, ma'am. Exactly. That's what Rashi does in terms of trying to help convey the message of the Gemara. Okay? So that is the case. Now, yes, Ada.
In the Torah, Rashi brings midrashim, but in the Gemara, I don't think.
Good question. I'm going to take that as a question.
Yeah.
All right. And my answer would be
No.
yes.
Yeah.
But where is he going to bring midrash from, do you think? If from the Torah we saw that he brought midrashim to convey morals and values from midrash Agadah, okay, from lore. Exactly. From the Gemara, if Rashi wants to cite, okay, Chazal, where is he going to cite it from? Primarily those texts that are halachic midrashim. Things like a book like the Mechilta on the book of Shmot, okay? Sifra, Sifrei, these other midrashay halacha, okay? That also can be a source for him, right? Okay, so that I think is, again, why Pearl in his third point wanted to tell us, again, that such laws perhaps couldn't be understood, okay? Even at a time without some sort of traditional explanation and background.
Well, but Midrash Halacha will tell you what the law is.
Midrash Halakha would give you a source. Okay, it does not always tell the law. It doesn't specify what the halacha is. Okay, right? Another time, maybe I'll do a course on understanding halakha or approaches to halakha. There is, by the way, if you're really seriously interested in that topic, Menachem alone has a 3 or 4 volume book series. It's all one book, but it's 3 or 4 volumes on the sources, the history, the development, concepts of, and the book is simply called Jewish Law. Okay. I took a whole summer, I think, one time to read the book, but it is an outstanding source of information. Okay. So let's come back now to Rashi. Okay. So Rashi doesn't deal with pilpul. That's not his approach. He doesn't deal with theology. Okay. That's not his approach. He felt he was a participant in the discussion. Okay. Commenting here sometimes on a decision, commenting sometimes by bringing a moral or a spiritual or an ethical situation. Okay? And so I'm going to share with us a couple of examples at this point that I think it's worth understanding. And I'm taking it basically from the fact that in the notes to the chapter on Rashi and the Talmud, Shereshevsky gives some specifics. Okay. I'll give an example. In Gemara Brachot, okay, 60b, the Gemara tells us that Rabbi Abahu, okay, went into a bathhouse and the floor of the bathhouse began to crumble. Okay. Roman bathhouses, remember, had, okay, they had a flooring and it was upheld by pillars. Okay, and underneath the pillars, they had basically water that was heated. Okay, and so the Gemara tells us, Rabbi Abahu is quoted saying that on one occasion, when the floor of a bathhouse gave way, he stood on a pillar and miraculously managed to keep 100 men from falling and being buried by the rubble. Okay, so what does Rashi say? A little, sounds like a little, right? What Rabbi Abahu really meant to say was that he managed to support 1 or 2 men with one arm, and that these men in turn started a human chain, each man supporting the next, up to 100 men, so that they all emerged relatively unharmed. Okay?
That's not Medrash Halakha.
That's not halacha.
That's Rashi talking.
That's Rashi explaining the situation. So he's commenting then on a piece of Agadata, a piece of legend in the Gemara, but he's giving his own spin. Okay, another example. All right. Okay. In the Gemara Shabbat, okay. What is the best time of day for people that have their meals? Okay, regarding the best time of day in which people should have their meals, it says if one eats after the 6th hour of the morning,
Is that for Friday night meal?
day, during the day. Okay, so let's assume you get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, okay, and you have your first meal after noon, okay? It's like throwing a rock into a skin bottle. The Gemara says it's like throwing a rock into a bottle made out of skin, like a saddlebag, or like a wine holder that's made out of animal skin. Okay? In other words, it's going to cause damage to the item. Okay, a rock is, right, throwing it into that. So what happens? So he says, Rashi comments, kasher laguf v'li nireh lo kasher v'lo yafeh. Okay. Rashi says this means it's bad for the body. That's his pshat. But to me, it seems that it's neither bad nor good.
Bad what?
But neither bad nor good. Okay. To eat after 6 hours. In other words, if you don't eat anything till afternoon, if you got up at 6 o'clock in the morning. Okay. Again, another example, right? Okay, in this case, right, we see the following. He cites a particular case in regarding sacrifices, offerings, in the Gemara Zvachim. And then what does he do? His note is simply, this is the reading in tractate Me'ila. In other words, he tells us, how do we understand this particular item? We understand it like another source, and that's how we'll understand it the same way. Okay? So in other words, take what you learned here and apply it to what you learn over here. What does that tell us? It tells us that they did not study probably the entire Talmud all the way through. First of all, there aren't Gemara on all of sections of the Mishnah. And not only that, but remember, Rashi did not write commentaries on the entire Talmud Bavli. He didn't live to finish. Okay? Somebody had to finish certain places. Okay? And in one case, his grandson, okay, Rabbi Shmuel ben Meir, the Rashbam, who we normally think of as a biblical commentator, puts in the notes, here is where my grandfather passed away, and I continue to write his commentary in the Talmud. Okay? Tanis, I think. Tanis, Gemara Tani. Okay? Let's take another example. Okay? Here is a good one I think we can all understand. Right? We asked, where did Rashi cite halacha? On what basis could he have cited it from the Midrash? And I suggested that was not the case. But here Rashi is going to tell us. In Gemara Shabbos, page 135b, it talks about a statement by one of the rabbis that those male infants who were born naturally, okay, if the question is, do they, right, not by cesarean section, must be circumcised on the 8th day. Okay? Right? And says Rashi, there is an argument on this among the Tanaim, among the early sages. But what does Rashi tell us? This is the reading also in the She'iltot of Rav Achai of the Gaonic era. So he cites for us one of the other manuscripts that he would have had, okay, from a later source, from the Gaonim, citing how to understand the reading, the language of the text. Okay, let's take one other example. All right, for now, right? Everybody has heard of a city of refuge in the time of the, right, the Chumash. Okay, if a person kills somebody that they hated, right, can that murderer go to the city of refuge? Okay, the opinions are divided between Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi and other authorities. Okay, what does Rashi tell us in his comment? One who hated his victim does not go to the city of refuge. So there he cites clearly what the halacha is, but then he adds, this is the ruling which I found in the Gaonic responsa. Okay? So in other words, not only does he cite the halacha there, but he also cites his source for the halacha. So again, we see all of these kinds of examples in Rashi's statements, okay? Now, in Grossman's book, okay, where he talks about Rashi's commentary on the Gemara, I just want to share one or two brief items as we'll finish up today on this topic. Because as I say, next time, we're going to jump back a little bit to history, okay? Right. Grossman, okay, let me just answer a quick story to tell you how I got hold of this book, okay? This is part of a series of books, 4 or 5, 6 books that are published in Israel under a particular publishing house, okay? Merkaz Zalman Shazar L'Toldot Yisrael, okay? I was davening one morning in a what we would call a yeshiva, a rabbinical seminary, okay, that is primarily geared for what we would call kippah sruga, modern Orthodox individuals. And I'm sitting davening, and I look over to the pile of Sfarim that I'm sure the Talmud has, and on the top of the pile was this book. And I'm thinking to myself, why is somebody learning in this yeshiva reading a book that is written by a professor of history at Hebrew University on Rashi? Okay, why not? It's not the usual thing that you would normally, I think, always find among, volumes of Gemara and halacha and things like that. So I already had thought about teaching this subject. So I went to 2 or 3 bookstores to try to order the book. And everywhere I got, they said to me, well, it's out of print right now. When they print new ones, okay, we'll order it for you. So I finally ordered it, let's say, I don't know, May, okay, last May, all right. When did I get the book finally? Yeah, almost a year later, right.
Did you pay in advance?
Of course. How else do I expect to get the book, right?
That's why he was in no rush.
In any case. So Grossman is a professor of medieval Jewish history. And it's interesting that they would ask him to write on Rashi. But in this particular chapter on Rashi's Talmud commentary, he highlights 2 or 3 items that I really felt worth sharing, okay? In one case, right, he wants us to understand that Rashi's use of his phrase, that introductory phrase, is very important because it hints again at something we saw in the Chumash commentary. What is it that bothered Rashi? Why did he have to comment on that particular item? Okay, and that he suggests that Rashi felt if there were individuals that did not have the benefit of learning as he did in a place like Mines or a place like Worms, in those kinds of yeshivas, okay, and were learning the Gemara on their own, they would need some sort of guidance and direction, okay? Another example he felt, okay? And I think, again, this supports what Pearl and Sharashevsky and others suggested, that Rashi's style in the Gemara, okay, is a little different than that in the style in the Chumash. In the Chumash, we clearly saw he was the teacher. He was the one who was sharing something pedagogic, didactic information. Grossman questions that as to whether that was Rashi's approach in the Gemara. Okay? Others would disagree with Grossman. And they would say, no, Rashi is just as, so to speak, educationally focused in the Gemara as he was in the Chumash. But Grossman disagrees, as I said, and he says, this is the greatness of Rashi's Gemara commentary. Because we find an example, an interesting statement. Rashi's, one of his other grandsons, who was, as we say in French, nicht schlecht when it comes to Talmud. His name was Rabbeinu Tam. Okay? All right? Nicht schlecht. Right?
Not so bad.
Not so bad. Okay? Rabbeinu Tam says, I could have done an equally good job writing a commentary on the Talmud as my grandfather. Okay, remember Rabbeinu Tam was a child genius, but I could never have matched his commentary on the Chumash. Okay, implying that the style was different. In Chumash, he was the ultimate educator. In the Gemara, it's very clear that he interacted with the students. Now, that doesn't mean he wasn't a good educator, but his interaction, his involvement, his sharing, his citations, things like that. And so Grossman wants to emphasize that it's that involvement of being included in the text and drawing the learner into the text of the Gemara. Okay? And perhaps that is one of the reasons that Gemara became the focus of much of Jewish education, certainly yeshiva education, from the time of Rashi all the way to our present day. Okay? And so I'll just finish up today with one last item, okay? In which Grossman says, and I want to quote it shortly in Hebrew and then translate, Yesod didakti shachiach beperusho shel Rashi, shetoer b'harchava ayedei, etc., etc. Hu darko shel Rashi la'afnot et halomdim el haktaim hanimtzaim behemshech hasugiyah. Sorry. Okay. So he claims that this educational focus of Rashi is what is so significant in the Gemara, because that's what enables him to lead the student from one part of the Gemara to another, to keep them, if you will, involved in the interaction of what goes on. So I think we've sort of given at least a general overview today of Rashi's Gemara commentary. Next time, as I said, we're going to go back a little bit to talk about medieval Jewry, because one of the things we're going to have to deal with is the impact of the Crusades, okay? And find out at the same time that Rashi was not simply involved in writing commentary, okay? We know that throughout Jewish history, when there have been terrible events like the Crusades, there is a response, a literary response, which we would call kinos, elegies, okay? We find it throughout the liturgy of Tisha B'Av, but there are other occasions as well, and we're going to look at an example of something written by Rashi himself on the occasion of the near destruction of the Jewish communities of mines and worms at the time of the First Crusade. Okay? So we'll finish up there for today. Thank you all.